Welcome to the Heavy Spoilers Show. I'm your host Paul, and in this video we're breaking down Invincible Season 2, Episode 2 is now out, and it's packed with Easter eggs, comic book callbacks, and lots of things going on in it. Throughout this video we're going to be breaking it all down and going over our thoughts on the entry as a whole. When we last left Mark, we saw as he felt he was becoming his worst nightmare, which is that he was going to become his dad. This was something that could be the case too, as in the alternate universe we saw that he joined them. In this universe though, he's out there on his own, and we see as he attends his graduation just by himself. Now this took place during issue 17, with Mark's hat being thrown in the air above all the others. Man actually launched it up into the sky, and it came crashing down in England, which was a callback to an earlier joke. When Mark got his powers during issue 1, he too launched the Burger Mark garbage bag up into the sky. This also came crashing down on England, like what the hell, mate? And we'd learned a cult had formed around a guy talking about what was really going on with it. These things being thrown happened in two transformative moments in his life, with the first being him getting powers and now his graduation. Interestingly, the comics had this happening before he went to Mars, whereas in the show it happened during Season 1. Now in both the show and comics, Mark shows up late, but here we get the reason with it being Doc Seismic. Man's holding up the Washington Monument, riffing on how he held up Mount Rushmore in Season 1. Now, I believe in the comics, Seismic's second appearance was in issue 36, so there were bits in between, like spin-off things, but at this point he was tackled by the Guardians of the Globe. Rising from the ground with the Underdwellers, we saw him coming face to face with in Season 1, he's come back to claim the stone structures of Earth. Seismic's able to blast out seismic shocks from his wrists, which in many ways mimics the villain the Shocker. Pulling his magmanites out from under the ground, these two debuted during issue 36. Now it heats things up, and to a rousing graduation speech by Principal Winslow, he just delivers it perfectly.
Without testing your limits, you will never know how strong you truly are.
This battle at the monument is of course reminiscent of Spider-Man Homecoming, and like the webhead, Mark manages to push through. Now what this shows is that he's far stronger than he ever thought he could be, and the things he thought were limits are no longer the case. Man's Viltrumite DNA is getting stronger and stronger, and this will improve his abilities the longer that he lives. His aging's also slowing down too, meaning that he's going to live for thousands and thousands of years. And everyone goes up to accept their diplomas. Is it diplomas? Is it in America? With Mark's full name finally being revealed.
Marcus Sebastian Grayson.
In the comics, it was William who made fun of him, whereas here, Amber gets the jabbing. You of course get your full name read out on your wedding day, and the pair doing this sort of plays into the plotline later that happens with the fish people. In that we see Sebastian going under the sea, and we'll talk about how wildly that differs from the comics. Amber's name Justine is dropped there too, with Mark saying, just like what he says in the comics. Now we cut to Eve's treehouse, which Amber and Mark ended up visiting in the source material. This was all the way out in Africa, whereas here it's in a US forest to keep things more localized. They all start talking their plans, with Eve saying she's going to help finish up the reconstruction in Chicago. It's something that could hit a bit close to home, because Mark was obviously the reason that it happened. Clearly he's distant from the group, but we learn he's on call, hence why he's not drinking. Man's really thrown himself into protecting the planet because he wants to be as far away from what his dad was. Cut over to the USS A, which is where we catch the aftermath of the Mars mission. This bit riffs on the moment from issue 22 in which we saw NASA debriefing all the astronauts. They kind of reverse the order that we have here, with him initially being in the bathroom before going to the board. Either way in both, he then gets let go, with him struggling to keep his form together. This bit,
Please don't kill me! What? Spare me!
That's in the source material too, with him worrying that he's gonna get executed.
But effective immediately. You're taking a temporary leave till you can get your head on straight.
And obviously, you know, when you're adapting for a series, you have to kind of move things about a lot. I know the comics happen in different orders. Was there any point where you were kind of like, I need to put this bit in this season, even though it comes much later down the line, we need to have this in because it's such a powerful moment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that happened a little bit more in Season 1 than in Season 2. We had to do a little more rearranging in Season 1. But generally what happens, like Robert and I sit down early on in the process, and we look at the comics, you know, and we look at where we left off, and then we kind of try to find the spot that we think is a great emotional place to end a season on. We put that in place. And then we start to go through the comics. We start to build out everything in between the start and the end. We try to see what feels natural. Obviously, we try to follow the books as closely as we can. That's our roadmap. But there are cases where you want to move stuff around a little bit for emotional impact or for plotting impacts. I mean, obviously, like comic books, have issues. We have episodes, and issues end sometimes on a big moment. Oh, you want your television episode to sometimes end on a big moment, but we only have 8 episodes, 8 hours, a comic series. Like we might cover 20 issues, in a season or more or less. So you're just trying to find natural places that just the stories line up with our episodes and things kind of fall into place. It's a really organic process. And it changes. Like, we cover a different amount of episodes than we did in season 1. And that's going to change again for season 3. And I would, assume beyond. It's just like some seasons want to run a little quicker through the books. Some want to run a little slower. We just figure that out as we sit down and start to do it.
Now back in Chicago, we see Eve trying to fix things, which shows her humanitarian side playing out. Kind of reminded me a bit of the Titan arc in the first season, where we could see he was helping out the tenants. Unfortunately, Eve sees firsthand that even with good intentions, things don't always work out, and later on we see the damage that's caused by her just trying to help. Takes what could have been a pretty simplistic plot and turns it into the shades of grey that you'd always expect from this show. Even the Viltrumites, they think their invasion's in the right and that they're helping out Earth by putting us under their rule. Eve is sort of in a similar vein, with her powers leading to more issues than what was there before. Now Mark and Debbie's house, we see the house hasn't been fixed properly and that there's a cupboard door that just won't close. This represents the fault that Nolan left in their life and how even though things appear fine on the surface, the cracks are still there. It's never going to be back to the way it was, no matter how many vacations Debbie plans to take her mind off it. Mark can't do them though because of his responsibilities, and as they say, with great power comes great rice. Uncle Ben's rice. Use the code Uncle Ben's Spoilers for 50% off at Uncle Ben's Rice.
You son of a bitch! I'm in!
Anyway, I'm sure everyone who's been forced to be the man of the house can relate to this because you very much feel like it all rests on you. Even in YouTube, I feel like I can't take breaks because you never know when this shit's gonna end. All you want to do is keep working while the sun shines, and Mark's refusing to relax until he makes things right. And back with the Guardians, we see as they're exhausted from the rigmarole that the Immortals been putting them through. Rudy ends up exiting his suit, which is reminiscent of the way that Tony does during Spider-Man Homecoming. Cut across to the locker room where we get a play on season 1 when Adam Eve caught Rex explode in the showers with Kate. This time around though, the situation's flip, with it now being Rex who's catching out Kate. The cheater has become the cheatee, how they turn tables, and I appreciated how they changed up this moment from the comics. It was issue 25 that had Rex coming across them both, but we didn't actually see what was going on. Instead here, this is played like a flip on that initial scene, adding a real feeling of Rex being on the other side of it. Kate is with the Immortal, but she probably could have two-timed them without anyone knowing. Anyway, at this point, we cut across to Russ and also get some foreshadowing of Aquarius.
We begin by honoring Aquarius, King of Atlantis.
His death hangs heavy over the episode, and we also get a scene that plays out in issue 31. That had Russ watching the Guardians and seeing about Martian Man, who of course was killed by Omni Man in the first season. Realizing that one of his people made a home here, he sets out to become a replacement for him. Aquarius is of course an Aquaman parody in the series, with the Guardians being based on the Justice League. In the first season in comic, we saw him sat bored on his throne, explaining why he ended up going to the surface. This kingdom is something we see later on, with us also meeting his queen. Now, returning Guardians is also thematically shown in the next scene, when we see Mark heading out to tackle Darkwing. The original one was too killed by Omni-Man, but someone else has risen up in his place. This entire segment here, it plays out in issue 21, with Mark investigating his actions out in Midnight City. We learn that the Midnight Magician turned it into a land of eternal night after he cursed it back in 2002. Now this is when the original comic of that part was released, and I love how they gave it that date in reference to that. The Midnight Magician also ended up taking his own life, and thus the city's been stuck like this since the character's death. Now Darkwing is of course a play on Batman, with a new one being his Nightwing-esque sidekick that took over the role. There's also the entire look of the city, and I'm sure you'll recognise this as being like Batman the Animated Series. We can see that Darkwing's now went down a brutal route though, by the bodies that hang up in the city. The opening of the issue, that actually had him attacking a woman, whereas here we jump to the later meeting happening on the roof. And both Mark arrive to find the brutal wake of his destruction, and we learn about how Nightboy's carried on his work. Nightwing, Darkwing, you can see the connection there, and he's lost his mind since his mentor was killed off. Kids trained at an early age to be like Robin, they would of course probably end up having some issues, which we see the character also has too. Now in both the show and comics we see him using the same tactics, with him pulling Mark into something that's known as the Shadowverse. Kinda reminds me of the world that Cloak enters in the comics, and this pitch black dimension is terrifying to be in. Filled with monsters, Mark manages to get hold of him, and he says,
"I'm Omni-Man's son. You have no idea what I'm capable of."
Here in the Shadowverse we see the dark side of Mark coming out, and looking at his hand you can tell he starts to question if he's a good guy. This was the same thing he did at the end of episode 1, and you can start to really sense the conflict that's within him. Sense the conflict that's with him. Sound like a bloody Star Wars character. Now from here we get to Debbie, who berates Cecil for drafting him into being a soldier in his war. Cecil failed with what happened to his father, and though he promises not to harm Mark, we know that isn't the case. During season 1, he collected his blood and will likely have a backup plan so nothing like that happens again. Startled to see Donald, all those who are up to speed with the comics will know exactly what's going on and why the character's back. A Pinky promised Amazon I wouldn't spoil any future events, and I don't want Bezos kicking me out the rocket when we fly to Veltrum. The character goes on what's a really interesting arc, and I'm sure if you're that desperate to know, then you'll find out in the comments. They are playing things pretty close to the book though, so it's difficult to theory on something that you already know the answer to. I think the channels, the YouTube channels that haven't read the comics, they'll probably have a better time with theorizing this stuff, but it's difficult for me to talk about without out and out spoiling it. They have given Donald way more to do here because originally the whole house across the street thing was made up for the show. He wasn't killed during Omni-Man's rampage, and thus they're making it more closely attached to Mark. Now at Eve's, we see our parents are struggling financially, but they refuse to put the burden on their daughter. Whether that's down to pride or the fear that she might mess some things up, the relationship they have is very, very complicated. If you watch the Adam Eve special, then you'll know she's not actually theirs, and this further adds some interesting dynamics to the relationship. Eve's dad's now working at a burger mart, and we discover he lost his job after Omni-Man turned his last place into rubble. Eve can just do whatever she wants though, and she makes a gold apple for them, but they refuse to take anything. Also wonder if this apple ties in with her name Eve, and it might be a callback to the Garden of Eden. Now this is a similar power set to what Cersei had in the Eternals, with both being able to manipulate things at a molecular level. This makes her one of the most powerful characters in the entire show, but her positives are turned negatives against her best wishes. Now another character who's trying to make a difference is Amber, who we catch down at the homeless shelter. Taken to Las Vegas by Mark, it finally feels like we're getting more of the up-tempo fun stuff we had back in season 1. This was before it all turned to crap, and Mark's very much trying to just go back to those better days. Nolan of course also used to take Debbie on trips like this, and we saw one of those playing out during season 1. Now this really shows a difference between him and his father because Mark mounts up and goes out and does the work. Nolan on the other hand refused to step in, and he let Cecil's men handle it because he didn't care. Now the rest of the episode's taken from issue 15, and it begins with Mark meeting up with Cecil. Here we watch as the storm ravages the cliffs, whereas in the comics it was just out at Cecil's headquarters. In both, Mark's told that he has to marry a fish to bury the hatchet, but in the show things start to differ. He loves fish sticks. Now with Cecil, we watch as he takes on the Lizard League, which are characters who are mainstays in both the show and comics. These popped up at the start of the Adam Eve special, with Supreme Lizard now taking over King Lizard. Now the Lizard League, they're obviously somewhat of a joke group, with them being based on the Serpent Society that comes from Marvel Comics. Now it's during this they meet Shapesmith, who also showed up during this battle in the source material. He was also the one who managed to catch Seismic, so they've kind of put these two plot lines in the same episode, even if they're not connected, but it's still all connected. Either way, it was at this point they invited him in, which leads into what we see with the character later. Now down in Atlantis, we see Mark being taken in by his ship, which is when he comes face to face with the Queen. The comics actually had him somewhat going through with the marriage, with the consummation being planned to happen after he took down the Titan. This would be in front of all the people of Atlantis, with them getting it on right after the battle. Now in the comics, the Queen had a butler that was known as Lethan, who we found out was secretly in love with her. Realizing that he was Mark's only way out, they hatched a plan during the big combat encounter. Mark made it so it looked like Lethan took down the beast, and then it seemed like he'd saved the Queen, so the pair got it on. This allowed Mark to not have to fulfill the duty, and it meant he could go home and just return to the surface. Here though, they don't want to do that at all, and instead, nothing's going to happen with the wedding. What they want is to release their beast known as the Depth Dweller, who we kind of get a Finding Nemo thing with, where it's got a little antenna thing that seems like a cute creature. Back with Debbie, we see her about to sell a home, but she sees as the mailbox won't close. This reflects a door that she's had put in her house, and in both instances, they say it's been professionally done up. Clearly hasn't though, you can tell they've cut corners, and it just brings back the painful memories that she's been suppressing. I really like what they've done with her character in this season, and she's determined to get back on track and make the most of her life.
She's not your pet. What was that?
This still clearly stands as a sore point though, and she mutters it when she sees how badly the guy speaks to his partner. Clearly though, he doesn't view it as a partnership, which is very reminiscent of how Nolan saw Debbie. Now whereas with Mark we watched as he managed to get out on a technicality, in the show they do things a little different. Cecil's forces manage to buy Mark a distraction which frees the beast and lets him escape. However, after it ends up going on a rampage, he returns to fight it and then save the Queen. This helps to prove to Mark that he's not his father and somewhat makes up for the destruction that the pair caused. Throwing the Depth Dweller back into the depths, Mark's pulled down there too, but he emerges out on top. Alanis calls it even because he saved their lives, but I kind of feel like Cecil still doesn't trust Mark yet. After all, he disobeyed a direct order and is showing Cecil he could still go against him. Cecil ends up pulling up the audio of the fight, and I believe he's trying to see if this creature can be used against him. We saw how he broke out a similar tactic with Omni-Man, and Cecil might be keeping this in his back pocket. Now Donald's clearly starting to suspect something's off, and this distrust's also mirrored in the character. There's this feeling that everyone's detached from what's really going on, which is then mirrored in Eve returning home. Though she's trying to see things from her dad's point of view, he puts her down and says that her powers make her dangerous. You can easily see how the whole world would share this sentiment too, because so many lives have been destroyed by the actions of them. Debbie just can't handle this either, and she ends up smashing up the cupboard door, representing the broken home they live in. Back with the Guardians, we see his Shapesmiths inducted into the group, with the Immortal just welcoming him in with open arms. This kind of speaks to the old school comic book mentality that heroes used to have in the Golden Age, with them forming the Justice League even though nobody knew anything about the others. At this point he starts to lie about his backstory, which is when we cut out to Mars to see what's happening. This is kind of like what happens during issue 38, with us seeing the Sequid invasion as he tells us what happened. The astronauts were of course terrified the Sequids would come to Earth, and out on Mars we see as they've taken over. We end out their arc with them heading out into the stars and clearly coming down towards our planet. Jump across to the Lizard League headquarters, where we also get a scene from issue 38. That had King Lizard stepping in and shooting Supreme Lizard, which is exactly how it plays out during this moment. Love the way it comes across in both, and I can't wait until we see what happens with them further down the line. Anyway, from here we cut to the mid-credits scene and see a version of Mark held up in a machine. This is obviously an alternate universe where we see Donald and Cecil, or well, probably Donaldo and Cecilia. I'm guessing that's their names. Anyway, Angstrom's arrived to find out how Mark was caught, and we discover they did it when he was asleep. Sort of looks a bit like a machine we see a certain character hold up in later on, which I've got the editors to blur out because you might not want that spoiled. Either way, it shows Cecil's tactics and also cements that he's able to take the Viltrumites out. Now lets Angstrom know how to defeat Mark, and he's gained this knowledge from travelling the multiverse. Knowledge was what he wanted to know when travelling out of the multiverse, but now he's using it for selfish means instead of using it to help people. In his mind though, he's still doing a positive crusade because he's ridding the multiverse of one of its most dangerous people. Now all in all, that closes out the episode, and this was another really solid entry that pulled so many bits from the comics. As a massive fan of them, I love seeing how they pull it all together and thread these bits into one cohesive storyline. Everything is really kind of mounting up and feeling like it's building towards the themes in the show. Now this, I think it's all kind of built around what a kid feels like after his parents get divorced. It's just that it's being pushed to an extreme level. something I talked about with Simon Racioppa, but unfortunately I went back and watched the interview and it does spoil some of the later episodes in the season, so I don't exactly want to drop that yet, but it is coming down the line. Now, these metaphors are definitely laced throughout the episode though, and seeing Debbie watching the house falling apart really speaks to how the character is now feeling mentally. There's also the new people getting introduced like Shapesmith, and the cool things like all the threads being set up. There's so many things going on right now that pay off massively down the line, and I'm telling you, yeah, it's exciting where it goes. Now, obviously, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Make sure you're back next week, and please drop a like on the video as it massively helps us out. Make sure you subscribe as well, and if you want to support the channel as a member of the Spoiler Society, then please click the join button. You'll get early access to videos every week, and it goes such a long way to helping us out. If you want to get some Heavy Spoilers merch, we've got our t-shirt line located below the video that will let you pick up all kinds of tops like our Theory Time one, House of Dragons stuff, Marvel tees, and a lot more. We drop new designs on there all the time too, and huge thank you to everyone who's got one. Now, if you want something else to watch, we've got our breakdown from last week on screen right now, where we talked to Simon and kind of went over some of the big themes. Huge thank you if you watched that. I really appreciate you guys getting us opportunities like this, and yeah, all your support, it just means the world to me. Now, with that out of the way, I've been your host Paul, you've been the best, and I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.